Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Thank you. Please stand by. You will now be placed into conference. There are 15 participants in the conference.
Ms. Wilson, are you online?
Good morning.
Good morning. Ms. Sawyer, are you online? Mr. Klinkhardt, are you online?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, everybody's here 2 minutes early. That's great. So, hope everybody had a good evening.
I am expecting the internet in Anchorage to break today with school starting, so we'll see how everything goes.
Starting online?
Yes. Yeah, I'm relegated to a back bedroom so my daughter can join her choir practice.
Which school was that?
Golden View.
That's when you missed him?
Well, that's one that my daughter's at least virtually today.
Yeah.
In Anchorage.
Well, Juneau's starting on the 24th and all online.
So I just dumped another 6-6. One came back at 6-2. The other three came back at 6-6. So I just
somebody that's talking about 6-6.
I just did another one.
You
so
mute your phone?
If you see this right now, that means that I did a double wire, and then I'll put a number. I just did that. You know what I mean?
Whoever's having the conversation about water, could you mute?
Yeah, that's what I think we should start doing. I think because that's what I used to do when Steve and I were here. Was that I used to fucking dump massive.
He's not paying any attention.
And I would give him the like right now. I'm dumping the whole fucking barrel through him.
Hey, mute your phone. We don't need to listen to your swearing.
Oh, I wish we could play it back for him.
I wish we could.
If you break it down, there's 50 gallons.
Hey.
There's 100 plants. It's only like a half
Break it
gallon.
down 100 plants. Could you please mute your phone?
You know? Where's my wife's phone going off? Or is that mine?
Can you mute your phone, please?
That would be your phone. Oh, sorry, man. Sorry.
Yes,
sorry,
please,
guys.
mute your phone. We don't need to hear your conversation. Thank you.
I got way too much.
Starting off the day in appropriate fashion, I guess. Okay, so I show it is 9:01, and I'm going to reconvene the Marijuana Control Board meeting via teleconference on the 20th of August, 2020, and would note that all board members are present. Mr. Klinkhardt, Ms. Craig, Ms. Wilson. Ms. Sawyer online now?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. So I will ask Ms. Craig to note the roll as we start today. We had ended with tab 44, Tundra Brewing, and we'd agreed to table that until this morning. So is Mr. Simpson or Mr. Meyer on the line?
Mr. Meyer's on the line.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I'm on the line as well. I'm Brian Simpson.
Okay, Mr. Simpson, thank you. And Mr. Schulte was going to do some work, I believe about 15 minutes ago. He sent an email that had board guidance draft for discussion. Did everybody on the board receive that email?
Yes,
I received it, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
I provided
Schulte, do you want to discuss that with us?
Sure, yeah, I'll do that. I just want to make the comment. I provided it as a PDF also in case somebody wants to throw it up on the website so folks can look at it. So based on our discussion yesterday, this was my first attempt to just bring a little clarity and perhaps streamline the process of completing these MJ16s. And the idea there was just to allow for the possibility of multiple products with multiple variations, where the variations are only differences in flavor and or the strain used to produce the product. So I was trying to capture the labeling requirements and basically streamline the process without making it too overly broad. So this is my first attempt, and I realize there may be a couple things here, maybe many things that other board members would not want to have in there, but I just thought I'd throw this up and we could have a discussion about it.
Okay. I guess I would rather not have sort of talk about this enough right now, because we do have this one product and we do have this one business that is asking for product clearance. My review is that this or some variation of that, once the board had worked through this discussion, probably supports the manner in which Tundra Brewing is bringing their product forward. If the board's concurrence, I would like to deal with Tundra Brewing and then move this discussion down to when we complete all of our other business, which is the regulations package. I think we're going to have plenty of time this morning and still be done by noon to have a discussion of this and maybe a few other things. So if there's no objection from the board, I appreciate this. I think this gives us some guidance for Tundra Brewing this morning. And if that's okay with the rest of the board, I think that's how we'll proceed. So just check in. Mr. Miller, is that okay with you?
Yes.
Mr. Jaime?
Well, I'm okay proceeding with Tundra Brewing, but I think this PDF actually needs some discussion later on, like you mentioned.
Oh, yeah. No, I plan on having a discussion later. I just didn't want to hold up Tundra Brewing, and this looks like it would fit within that. So, Mr. Deschamps, is that okay with you? Mr. Schulte, you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So there was a motion on the floor to approve the one new product for Tundra Brewing. I got to find the right tab so I got the right name.
44, I believe.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it came up, it's just that okay, so this is Splash and various flavorings of Splash. Is there any other question or comments from the board to the applicant?
Nope.
Okay, so the motion is that was on the table yesterday and seconded was a motion to approve the new product Splash. We had a pretty lengthy discussion about the labeling and flavoring. So with that, we'll go to the vote. Mr. Deschamps?
Yes.
Mr. Jaime?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, reluctantly. So thank you all for hanging in there over the evening and calling in again this morning, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Meyer. We appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, so we were skipping over tab 45 and 46, which were the pending and delegated status, which now brings us to tab 47, which is a regulations tracking sheet. Mr. Klinkart.
Oh, sorry, I got to unmute my button there.
It's still early in the morning.
Well, I appreciate it. I try to be good. So yes, this regulations project tracking sheet was actually noted in one of our many last meetings. I believe it was board member Nick Miller who had asked about it, what had happened to it. So we wanted to make sure to include it so that that information was available to to the board to kind of see where we're at and where we're going. So, Jane, do you have anything to add to that?
No, thank you, Mr. Through the Chair. No, I don't have anything to add to that. As you can see, we have quite a few projects that are still open, and some of them need a working group that it'll be one by one, I guess. And
Okay.
no, yeah, nothing else.
Okay, Mr. Miller, is this what you were looking for?
It is. It just helps me to stay focused and let the public know what's been proposed and what we're working on.
Okay. Is there any question from any board member of the staff on this tracking sheet? Okay. All right then. We are on to proposed regulation projects board's requests. Are there any board requests for regulations projects?
Mr. Jaime?
Mr. Jaime.
Yeah, I'm going through the list, and I'm sure it's on there. I just can't find it. It's the bail schedule. I think, once again, that's a powerful and effective tool for enforcement that actually keeps the industry in line versus the NOVs, which are pretty much meaningless.
Okay. Ms. Sawyer, is it? I don't think we called it a bail schedule, but...
No, through the chair, Mr. Jaime, it is called fine schedule. It doesn't have a project number, so I don't think it even has gotten to.
Oh no, it's on there. Yeah.
To be open. Yeah, it's still in limbo.
It's on page 4.
Yes, fine schedule. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think that one's pretty important to be to move it along.
Yes, and I think that that's one that I think probably is going to require a working group. Okay. Is there anybody else that had a particular regulation project that they wanted to talk about?
Through the chair.
Mr. Miller.
I apologize. I'm going through the list, so if it's on here and I miss it, please let me know. But I would like to start a regulations project to raise the 5 milligram limit on edibles product.
Okay. I don't think we started one, so I don't think you'll find it on the list.
Okay.
I know at times it comes up, but I don't think we've ever decided. Maybe Ms. Sawyer can tell me, but I don't think there's one on here.
And that's where I was getting confused. I know we've talked about it a lot, but I'm not sure it ever made it to a list.
Right. Ms. Sawyer?
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Miller, no. You have talked about it a lot. You guys have talked about it a lot, but it has never been on the list. It's never been, like, directly proposed as a project.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that something are you guys making a decision on this right now, or are you still talking? No?
Well, we're under board request, so
okay.
Mr. Miller raised it. I guess we needed, whether from the board, whether we want to do this, and if we have a volunteer from the board to sort of work with staff on maybe determining how we might proceed, whether we need some kind of review of the literature, review of other state statutes, how much the attorney can help us with that. I think we should have sort of a game plan lined out before we just simply say, you know, we need to start a project. Do you have any ideas, Mr. Miller? You on mute, Mr. Miller?
Yes, I am.
So I could hear you talking, but I couldn't hear you talking.
I'm sitting here next to Clink on mute. Just joking. You know, I don't. I think I don't really have any ideas. I apologize, but
okay.
I would like to.
Well, why don't we do this? If Ms. Sawyer, if you and Ms. Wilson have some time between now and October, if you could come back at the October meeting with a report on what are edible limits in other states that have legalized recreational marijuana. Just give us a list. That's all you need to do. And at that point, then maybe we can make a decision whether we will open up a regulations project and what that might look like. Would that be okay with you, Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I think so. I would like to see what other states are doing, and unfortunately, I haven't paid that much attention to outside of Alaska.
Okay. Well, I think we'll proceed that way then, and let staff and the attorney do some work on what other states have done in terms of edible limits, and then we'll see in October if we have a process by which we might want to move forward. Okay, is there any other member that has any requests for potential regulation changes?
Can I? Oh, Sue, apologize.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Wilson.
Recall yesterday we were discussing what to do about entities that may be processing both marijuana and hemp, and whether you wanted to address that through a regulations project.
Very good. Yes, I think we probably do. I think there's some impetus to that, and especially with the hemp project sort of gets up. I think one of my interests is certainly in testing. I don't know if any of our labs could get to the point of testing pesticides, but certainly manufacturers and producers could benefit from that. May also be partly the retail stop having two separate licenses. I'm guessing, since you're the only person that works both sides of that aisle, could you work with Jane and maybe come back with a first draft in October?
We will do that, and I will also reach out to Ms. Weltstein, since she's been trying to figure out how to make this work for her clients. I don't know if Jana's on the phone, but...
Yeah, okay.
I am, and that sounds good.
Okay. All right. So we'll have a report on limits and maybe a first draft on how we might coordinate better with the industrial hemp side of the world at the October meeting. Is there any other regulations projects?
Through the chair.
Mr. Miller.
So I really wanted to, I guess, gauge the board's feeling on the IDs we accept and ask what the board's temperature is to modify the regulations or a regulations project to accept tribal IDs as identification. Spending a lot of time in rural, I'm learning more and more every day how many people actually don't have a state-issued ID and have a tribal ID, and they use it for banking and a lot of other services. So I just really wanted to gauge the board's feeling on that and see if they would consider it for a regulations project.
Any comments from board members?
Yeah, this is Mr. Dushak.
Mr. Dushak.
So I would strongly support us moving in that direction. Come and live here in Bristol Bay. I would strongly support that move and be interested in us pursuing that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jaime.
Mr. Jaime.
Seems like I'm always the person on the other side of the lines here, but I lived out there in Nome for 4 years. Spent tons of time in every village in that region, and unfortunately, those IDs are pretty easy to manipulate and change dates of births and everything else. You can make a fake ID almost out of anything, except for these newer IDs that have holographics and everything else. So, unless we have some examples of the tribal IDs that they have out there now, and they have holographic security to them where they cannot be manipulated, I'd be against it. unless I saw all these other security features. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jaime, maybe you can answer this question, and maybe Ms. Miller. There was a lot of debate when the state was trying to move to real ID. And there was a lot of issues related to DMV not having offices in rural Alaska, whether or not tribes would pay to have the state bring their equipment out to rural Alaska to do real IDs, even though a lot of people in rural Alaska did not have driver's licenses. And there was a debate around using tribal IDs to be able to get on an airplane if you didn't have a driver's license, if you didn't have a real ID, and you didn't have a passport. And I don't know, maybe Ms. Wilson or Mr. Jaime understands what may or may not be the final decision on that, because I know some tribes weren't willing to pay DMV. There was a lot of discussion about DMV is taxed by the state to provide that service, and why should people in rural Alaska have to pay to have the state do what they're supposed to do under statute. So I appreciate what Mr. Jaime says about manipulation, but at the same time, I think people are able to get on airplanes with tribal IDs than if they don't have a driver's license or passport. So do either you, Mr. Jaime, or Ms. Wilson have any comments about where we think we are?
I don't, but I'd be happy to. Go ahead,
Wilson.
sir.
Continue, please, Ms. Wilson.
I was just going to say I'd be happy to look into that for the next board meeting and then see if tribes have different standards to their cards and how they produce them, and whether they're subject to manipulation, and whether they've put any protections in place. I mean, I know it works for getting them health care. And when I was with the hospital, I didn't see a lot of false IDs, but obviously this is different, trying to get a product that you may not be old enough for. So if you give me a little time to report, I'd be happy to look into that and also see how the real ID issue is moving forward with tribes. Okay.
Mr. Jaime.
Mr. Chairman?
No, that's great that everything that Ms. Wilson said. The only other thing would be, they can possibly use those tribal IDs to fly, but those are like Grand Aviation, the smaller airlines in Alaska. But I don't believe you can use a tribal card to get on Alaska Airlines to travel to Miami, Florida. At least not when the real ID starts here next October.
Yeah, Mr. Holscher, I believe I heard your voice.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I apologize for interjecting, but I think that so I proposed that this occur with the alcohol board quite some time ago, and Jedediah Smith drafted up a regulation, and unfortunately that failed. It got very negative feedback from the public, from a lot of alcohol owners, but I just want to let you guys know that was the fate of that one. But there was some good draft language that would have required tribes who wanted to opt in to allow tribal IDs as acceptable forms of ID to submit copies and an explanation and an example of their tribal IDs to the AMCO office. And there's so many tribes across the state of Alaska that would create a lot of work for us, but at the same time, I can speak from personal experience that this definitely is something that would benefit the people that live in rural Alaska, as a lot of people never travel to Bethel or Anchorage on a frequent basis, and when they do, they very rarely have the resources or time to get a state ID. A lot of times it's only because they're required to for some reason. And I can also help check on a few things, but my understanding is even on Alaska Airlines, tribal IDs are acceptable as forms of ID for travel. And I know that this question has been brought up quite a bit by not only alcohol or marijuana, but alcohol as well. And our regulations for alcohol, and I believe they mirror with marijuana, are pretty clear that they talk about having a date of birth, a photograph, and they being either made of or encased in plastic. And I want to say that from my experience being out in Bush, Alaska, that is, that fits a description of what they try to do. Are they subject to copies and fraud, people committing fraud or trying to make a false ID? Yes, absolutely. But I think those cases are few and far between. I think that with what the state is doing with printed IDs on a black and white 8x11 sheet of paper are more subject to manipulation than those would be. And those are acceptable as forms of ID, but not for travel. Those cannot be used for travel. So I think there is a clear distinction, and there is some cross-language, conflicting cross-languages between us, alcohol, and maybe what is acceptable for travel and those types of things. So I sent out an advisory, as everybody knows, to reluctantly send out the advisory saying that these are not acceptable forms of ID for purchasing marijuana because they were not issued by a government, a state or a federal government, I should say, because that's exactly the language used in our laws. So I want to say that this would help the people of Alaska, and it's something that if we can make as, I guess, as least susceptible to people making copies or making fake IDs, then I would support this. And if the board wants me to do any legwork on anything, I can as well to help alleviate that from our attorney.
Okay, I will leave that up to the attorney. It's nice to know that maybe there was a regulation project on the alcohol side that failed, and there would be language there and a record of decision. So is that Ms. Wilson?
No, Mr. Chair,
No.
This is Deshock.
Oh, Mr. Deshock.
Yeah, one thing to keep, and maybe maybe somebody can clear this up for me, but if I were sitting on the alcohol board, I would be opposed to this because of the state's tool of using the red stripe in order to say that somebody has been ordered not to purchase alcohol. I don't know if we do the same thing for being ordered not to purchase marijuana. I just don't know that off the top of my head right now. Whether or not somebody makes an ID, a fake ID, or not an ID, that wouldn't be the main concern to me. But there would be the concern of if somebody has been court ordered, how do you show this when you go in and purchase marijuana? That would be the sticking point that I would think about.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Holscher.
I just want to clarify on the red stripe and on the conditions of release. Both of those issues, while they're great points, are the responsibility of the individual who has been released on condition or given that red stripe. The onus falls completely on them, and the responsibility falls on them. If they have a red stripe on a restricted license and they choose to use a passport or a military ID, they can do that as well for purchase of alcohol. But if they get caught doing that, then they are legally responsible or liable for the crime that they are committing. So the same for a fake ID, it falls on the person using that ID. So I think there's some tools there that doesn't hold the licensees liable, and there's language specifically in the alcohol statutes that state that. So I think those concerns are valid, but I also believe that they have been addressed by the statutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yep, clears that up for me.
Okay. All right. So we will leave that with the attorney and staff, maybe. Mr. Miller.
So I would like to say one more thing, and I hope that maybe we could get some support to get a draft in the next meeting, because I don't think it's that big of a reg change. But going out to rural Alaska all the time, you were talking about the DMVs. Bethel has a DMV, and it serves, I believe, probably 60 villages. Not that I've been to Bethel probably 30 times this year, and the DMV office is yet to be open. So,
yeah,
I'm not lying. They can't keep an employee. I don't know what's going on out there, but they can't keep an employee at DMV, and they fly one out every now and then. But, you know, they are allowed to fly on Alaska Airlines with a tribal ID. I can only assume that's in state, because once you get out of state, Lord only knows what happens, right? But exactly. I do think it's the right thing to do to support rural Alaska, because a lot of folks just don't have access. And, you know, whether we want to admit it or not, if someone wants to buy alcohol or cannabis and they don't have an ID, they end up going somewhere else to purchase it. So that's where it lands for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was just going to say that I think you're correct. I think it's adding a couple of words to one part of the regulation. It's not a major rewrite, but I think there's a lot of issues back behind there, as Mr. Holscher and apparently the alcohol board has dealt with before. So I will leave that up to staff and attorney, and if they can bring back a draft in October, maybe with some guidelines or some review of these issues, I think that would be appreciated.
We can do that.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, yeah, if the work product's there, it won't be difficult to edit it.
Okay. All right. Are there any other board requests for a look at regulations? Okay. I'm going to add one, and it's been one that I think is also on our list for working groups. And that was raised earlier during the public testimony, and that's our education courses. I have some issues around that, and have had, in terms of how we review those, how we monitor those. I think they go for 3 years, and then they just simply get renewed. And I think it's more of a working group issue to work through that before it becomes a regulation. I just don't want it to drop off the board, and I think it's something that's very important. And I realize that a lot of those are from out of state, and a lot of them we had some issues with that dealt more with medical marijuana than recreational marijuana. We make a lot of changes, but so anyway, I want to make sure that staff knows that, at least in my mind, that may be the next working group, is to sort of deal with the regulations around the education courses and what we might adopt. I also believe that Ms. Weltzine had raised the issue of caps on number of licenses. And we have talked about that before. We have not wanted to make licenses have an economic value like they do with some of the alcohol licenses, where there's such a limit that those licenses become expensive. I know here in Juneau there are some liquor licenses that have been reportedly sold for over $400,000. And yet, I understand from Ms. Wiltsine that if there is some federal changes, then we could easily have some real issues there. but I don't think that rises to a regulation project at this point. But maybe when staff is checking on edible limits, they should ask those states if they have a cap on the number of licenses, and if they do, what are their conditions. But I think those two that were brought up in public testimony deserve some attention. Education courses, I think, much more than cap on limits. Here in Juneau, it was brought up when we had our marijuana committee and our zoning and conditional use permit to put a cap, and it was soundly defeated. So with that, those are the only two others that I think we need to at least keep up on the radar.
Mr.
So
Chair.
is there anything else, Ms. Wilson?
Along that line, yes, I would be happy to research that, but I have been taking part in some national discussions of assistant attorney generals, and an issue a number of states are grappling with that I'm not certain is at issue here, but I wanted to raise it, is equity in distribution of licenses. Many states are reaching out to racial minorities to make sure they're getting an accurate or and the same opportunity for a license as others. I don't know if we have that issue at play, but since we're talking about licenses, I thought I'd just bring it up.
Okay, thank you. I think our previous board member, Mr. Springer, raised that issue in his last talk to us, his last meeting, that there were not a lot of minority persons that own businesses, especially in rural areas. And I think that is an issue across the state. I know with CARES Act, and we are trying to loan the businesses here in Juneau, we talked about whether minority businesses were applying and could we have a separate program for them. And literally we were unable to go to any official source to try to find out who were the minority businesses in Juneau and who owned them. And other than if they're part of a nonprofit like with Tlingit-Haida or Tlingit-Haida Housing or a subsidy of See Alaska, there really wasn't any obvious way to know that. But your point's well taken, I think, in terms of the distribution, in terms of minority businesses. We should look at that if it raises the issue. But I know Mr. Springer was definitely concerned about that over his service on the board. Okay, is there any other thing to come before the board related to board requests on proposed regulations?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, just something you said reminded me of a discussion we had yesterday, and I wanted to kind of circle back on this. We received some public comment expressing concern about organizations outside of the state delivering handler card training in Alaska, and she brought up what I thought were some pretty valid concerns. My question is for Ms. Wilson, and that question is, do we have the ability to limit that part of our industry to in-state only, as we have for growers, processors, retailers? I mean, the argument in favor of Alaska only was that we could identify and vet these licensees better, consistent with what was then the Cole memo. I don't think that imperative exists for the training. However, I do think that the arguments in favor of an Alaska-only business are worth considering. So, do we have that ability, do you think? And I mean, clearly we'd have to.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, your thoughts, please.
My thoughts is it would probably require a statutory change, but I hate giving advice on the fly. So, with the regulation project essentially being open into this, I'll look into what is necessary to achieve an Alaska-only class. And then whether that raises problems under the privileges and immunities clauses of the U.S. Constitution, whether it's a sufficient police power that in essence, it would be, should the state have such a hold on who's teaching the classes to ensure the public is safe, that we can require in Alaska only ownership. So that's my thoughts off the fly, is that we have to look at both the Constitution and the statute, but I'm happy to do both because I love those kind of questions.
Thanks. I would appreciate your thoughts on that at another time.
And Mr. Scholey, I think the TAMS courses on the alcohol side, I don't know how many of those are in-state versus out-of-state, how many are in-person, online. I think that's part of the education issue that I was talking about in terms of a working group. You know, how often, how long do those courses last? How do we monitor those? And I think, you know, we had some real issues when we were talking about that, because under the statute, marijuana handlers cards are sort of not, you know, in the statute or those education courses. And so we deal with those really differently. But I think those are good questions, whether we can do that and whether alcohol side on the TAMS courses are all in-state or not. We're dealing with somewhat the same issue.
And the director may know about that. I recall the issue coming up in the ABC meetings, but we can certainly do a comparison.
Okay, that would be good. All right, so that's a lot of work for staff for the next meeting, and should keep us going. Any other board requests in terms of regulations projects? Okay, hearing none. Just to recap, so staff will have an idea. Mr. Jaime talked about the fine schedule, and I think that as a working group issue. Staff is going to bring back a report on the limits on edibles in other states at the October meeting. Ms. Wilson, Ms. Sawyer are going to work on potential changes to have more coordination between hemp and marijuana in terms of businesses doing both. And staff is going to research the ideas of tribal IDs and all of the issues combined in that related to real ID and acceptance, including a review of the regulations project that failed on the alcohol side. And then we're also going to look at maybe the next working group being the education courses and how those are done across other states and or with the alcohol. So I think that's all of what my notes say. So hopefully we're good on that one.
Mr. Chair, we'll also look at limits, whether other states are limiting the number of licenses.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I didn't have that written down. I do now. Thank you very much. Okay.
Through the chair, can I have one more question?
Sure, Mr. Miller.
Unfortunately, it might be a little bit of work for staff, but do we have a mechanism in place that we could send out, I don't know, something to the public that says we're looking for comment on limiting license numbers, and see if we get some feedback before we get too deep into this? I mean, I'm curious as to what the public thinks, and you know, do we have a mechanism in place to do that before we officially start some type of reg project?
Well, if something's not on the agenda, you can certainly request public comment at your next meeting. Well, no, then it would be on the agenda. But you could make an exception, I guess, to your rule to say you just want public comment on this issue.
I don't know. It's just an idea. I don't think we've ever tried it, but you know,
Mr. Miller, Miller, could I suggest that maybe the AMIA, which you're on the board, might do a survey, and then you could report back that survey to us, and you could let us know if you contacted businesses that are not part of your organization as well as within your organization, and you could report back a survey that the industry could certainly do that would help guide us.
This one is not working.
Apologize, my attacking.
that for
I'll see what we have or what we can do. We can do it, and we'll get you back the information. But I was more curious about people outside the industry, what they thought. So the public. So
Yeah, well, and that gets tricky when you sort of do a pre-survey of a regulations project and stuff. So that makes it a little bit harder. But you know, if the AMIA or other organizations could somehow gather some information, that would be helpful for us.
we will see what we can get done before the next meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. So let's move on to tab 48. This is director of a corporation. Is a regulation project that we can vote to adopt, amend, put out, send a draft back, or close without any action. So Mr. Klinkhart or Ms. Sawyer, whoever.
This is Jane.
Ms. Sawyer.
Okay, so thank you. Through the chair, this regulation project was it was open at the June meeting and was sent out for public comment for about 43 days, closing on July 31st. One comment was received and is attached. The changes would do the following, would add corporate officer and director of a corporation to be required to be a resident of the state. We already require this. It should not be a burden to anyone in the industry or in general. And the other one is 06040, which is ownership change, and it essentially does the same thing. It would add a corporate officer and director of a corporation to be required to be a resident of the state. And
Okay.
that's it. Thank you.
All right. Is there questions from the board or comments from the board?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So in the notes, I mean, obviously I was there for the discussion, but I want to try to refresh my memory here. It would appear that the changes really just codify what we've already been doing without actually changing the policy or the regulation. Well, it is changing the regulation, but it's not changing anything that we haven't been doing for the last 4 or 5 years, correct?
Ms. Sawyer.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure, because the absence of, well, the minimal, or the lack of more public comment kind of made me wonder about that. So, okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, is there board action? Is there a motion?
I would have moved to adopt this.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adopt 3AAC 306-015B4 and 3AAC 306-040. Is there any other comment from board members? Okay, then on the motion, Mr. DeShock.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Jaime.
Yes.
Mr. Schulte.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, so we're on to tab 49, which is the regulations project on administrative hold and seizure. Again, the same options that were before us before. So Ms. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The board opened this project at the January 2020 meeting. At the June meeting, the board made revisions to the draft and sent it out for public comment. The revised draft was out for 45 days, closing on July 31st. No comments were received. The changes would be under 306-800, inspection investigation and supervision to allow administrative hold of marijuana or marijuana product by the director, an enforcement agent, an employee of the board, or a peace officer acting in an official capacity. 306830, seizure of marijuana or marijuana product is repealed and readopted for logical purposes to add provisions regarding the administrative hold. And 306990B adds the definition of probable cause, which is used in 306830. I don't know if Ms. Wilson or Mr. Clinkhart has anything else to add to this.
I could add that the Department of Law made a preliminary review of this and request that we not define that the board not define probable cause and simply leave it to case law. So that would be one request for revision.
Through the chair, director.
Mr. Clinkhart.
And I concur. After discussing this with Ms. Wilson, I think it doesn't take away or add anything other than just ensures later on that any changes to case law will continue to follow the law. Over.
Okay, Ms. Wilson, if we move to delete that section, do we need to put this back out for public comment, or is that just simply
No.
we just adopt the first two and not the third section of that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Basically, it's going to be the same. Director Clinkhart certainly knows what probable cause is, and it's really going to be no different than case law. It just permits changes to it and avoids problems in the future. I would consider that a technical amendment that does not need to be reset out for public comment.
Okay. The civil libertarian in me always questions whether police understand probable cause or not, but I won't get into that discussion with Mr. Clinkhart today.
Thank you, sir.
Very good.
Okay, any other comments from the board? Questions from the board?
Just Mr. Chairman, a procedural question.
Mr. Schulte.
So I was going to make a motion to adopt the first two sections. Would it be appropriate to state it that way, or just?
Yes, I think you would state that the motion is to adopt 800 and 830, but not, just don't even talk about 990B.
Okay, so that would be my motion then, that we adopt the changes to 306-800, 306-830 only.
Okay, that's the motion. Is there a second?
Jaime seconds it.
Oh, Tiny, thank you. Is there any other discussion from the board? Is that a sufficient motion, Ms. Wilson?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So there's no further comments from the board. So the motion is to adopt 3 AAC 306-800 and 3 AAC 306-830. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Jaime?
Yes.
Mr. DeShock?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, so we're on to tab 50. This is a regulations project on overlapping premises. And again, the same options are before us to adopt, amend, put out for public comment, send back, or close with no action. Ms. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the June meeting, the board sent out this draft for public comment. The public comment period was open for about 60 days, closing on August 14th. 3 comments were received and they are attached for your consideration. In general, this project would permit, upon approval, overlapping of licensed premises between licensed businesses that are owned by the same individual or the same group of individuals under the same roof, licensed premises. Permit having non-contiguous licensed areas that could also be shared between licenses owned by the same individual or the same group of individuals under the same roof or licensed premises. Permit share marijuana storage areas between licenses owned by the same individual or the same group of individuals under the same roof or licensed premises. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions of staff from the board?
This is Jaime. In the second bullet point, what does this language having non-contiguous license areas mean exactly?
Ms. Sawyer.
So the way that we have interpreted contiguity or contiguous licensed premises is that even is in the same building, if in my house I had two separate rooms that were licensed premises and the hallway wasn't part of the licensed premises, we would consider that to be non-contiguous. So in a simple example, this would allow for that to happen, for the hallway not to be part of the, licensed premises. If that makes sense.
Mr. Jaime, is that
It does
answer your
not
question?
actually.
It does not.
No, can you provide maybe a little more explanation of, let's say it's a strip mall? Use that as an example.
Can you give me a scenario? So in a strip mall, let me think about this. So under a strip mall, I guess the same licensee or the same group of individuals would have to have right of possession of the entire strip mall in order for them to do this.
So why is this language even in there if it's covered by the first bullet point?
Let me read here.
I just don't want to make it too broad of what they can and can't do. We need to have, set definitions or set areas so the regulation is easy to interpret and it's not leaving up to the board to interpret it again.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Schulte.
This is a regs change that I had been wishing we could have for quite some time, and I vaguely recall that there was a couple of licensees down in Juneau where there's a relative scarcity of available buildings, and some of them are not perfectly suited to the proposed use. And I can't think of a name off the top of my head, but there were situations where, because of the configuration of the building and the space that's available, it was it made a huge difference to allow licensees to share, like a secure storage area or a surveillance area or a processing area that might not be directly between the two facilities. It might be down a hall or nearby. I'm not sure if that's really clear.
I believe the one case that comes to mind is we do have a grow operation that is on the second floor of a public storage building. And there was still public storage on the ground floor, but the ground floor also had an office that they would share with their other grow operation, which was in a separate building, also within the fenced building of that storage. I think that may be one case. There may be another that I'm trying to think about. But I think for Mr. Jaime, it's, I'm trying to remember some of the premises diagrams that we have looked at where they had like a grow operation, they had a retail, and they had a office that was sort of in the middle between the two, and that office wasn't restricted access, but that's where some of the surveillance equipment was. It wasn't. So I'm not sure that there's much concern, and it's one of those things that we need to look at on terms of the premises diagram when they're submitting their application, have staff comment on that if there's a problem given this regulation. But I think at times we have not allowed that to happen, and a couple of places where they have a licensed premises and two offices. I'm sure I'm not explaining it very well, because it's really hard without
Mr.
actually
Chair?
looking at a premises diagram. Ms. Wilson?
On page 8 of the regulations package, you'll see that the board still has the authority not to approve non-contiguous portions. So of course, that's going to depend on who's on the board, but if some portion looks just insane for operations and public safety, the board would have the discretion to deny it.
So is that 306.705?
5, yes. It says the board may approve non-contiguous. It doesn't require you to do so.
Okay. Mr. Jaime, does that help? Or we make it more confusing?
No, that helps. I just, like I said, it seems like most of the points that the board was trying to, in my recollection, most of the points that we were trying to accomplish are accomplished by bullet point 1 and 3. And I was just concerned, like I said, about this whole non-contiguous, because if we leave it how it is, it's the same thing.
Okay.
I mean, it's just ambiguous language, I believe.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schulte?
I kind of agree with Mr. Jaime. I having read this now about 4 times, I get what he's referring to. But as Ms. Wilson pointed out, this is really just the narrative accompanying the regs project. And if you go down to the actual regs, as Ms. Wilson pointed out, we still, the board, whether it's us or other board members, still have the discretion to approve or not approve a specific configuration.
No, and I understand all that. It's just like I said, I just think it's leaving a lot to the licensees who are doing these diagrams, and they think they're right, and then they're not. So then it postpones their license even longer. You know, if it's still subjective. I guess the overall language, but just I wish it was a little more clear for licensees, so they're not submitting diagrams that are all convoluted and just a mess, and they assume that they're going to pass because of this new language.
Okay.
So, my concern was for the licensees, not public safety or anything of that nature.
Okay. All right. Is there any other comments? Okay. Is there a motion?
Move to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Then moved and seconded to adopt the regulations as presented. There were 3 public comments. All 3 were in support of the regulations being adopted. Is there any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, hearing none. On the motion to approve the regulations related to overlapping premises, Mr. Jaime?
No.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Mr. DeShock?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That passes on 4-2. Okay, thank you. We are on to tab 51. And this is revised drafts requested by the board, infants on premises. So, Mr. Klinkart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You guys opened this project in May of 2019, although it first came up, at least I first heard about it in my first meeting back in I guess, January, that to look into the issue of what's going on with the licensed premises where you can't have anybody under the age of 21, and yet you've got employees or staff that need to be able to care for in the way of breastfeeding an infant. Long story short is, after working with DHSS and their nurses having to do with public safety, they kind of led us to federal law, which, as we looked into it, we had the marijuana board and the regulations had a little bit of a conflict with the federal labor law, in that businesses do have to provide, if you have a certain number of employees, an area for a staff member to be able to provide breastfeeding for an infant. So what you have in front of you is kind of a potential solution for that would allow all marijuana businesses, no matter what size, to at least have the option to be able to designate a area within the licensed premises specifically for this particular need. So be happy to try to answer any questions that you have. Basically, we put this together for you to take a look at, and there's a couple options. We can put it out for public comment, amend it, put it out for public comment, send back for revisions, or close it without any action. We await your questions.
Okay, questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman?
No, that's
Mr. Schulte.
I was just going to say, I appreciate the director's research on this, and it actually makes eminent sense. It seems like a pretty reasonable solution, so I'm probably going to support putting this out for public comment.
Okay, Mr. Jaime.
Reviewing this, at least the director's comments and such, I truly agree that employees should have a space of their own to breastfeed, but it doesn't go into where that baby's going to be or the infant's going to be during other times and when the female is not actively breastfeeding. At least I don't see it in here. Was that addressed at all?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Wilson.
the child would only be allowed on site for breastfeeding.
Okay, in that designated area only.
Correct. So basically, this will go out for public comment, but this would prevent the need for the licensee or the employee of the licensee to leave the facility, go to their car to breastfeed their child, etc. But it doesn't expand anything beyond either breastfeeding or the expression of milk, and it does put a limit on the age of the child where this is permissible to 12 months or less.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, I would just want to, Mr. Chair Deshak.
Mr. Deshak.
I would just want to ensure, legally speaking, that this language wouldn't be prone to being construed to mandate all providers. Down the road, is the way that it's worded, could it be construed to say that employees have the right to this room because not all facilities are going to be able to meet with that? And I wouldn't want to see it mandated, though. If there's the potential of providing it, I don't have a problem with it, but I wouldn't want to mandate that a licensee design a room specifically for the purpose.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Wilson.
The language will not mandate it for licensees that have fewer than 50 employees. If they do have 50 or more employees, they are already subject to the requirement to have that provision under 29 U.S.C. 207, which is referenced in Section C of the regulation project before you. And I honestly don't know if we have a licensee that has that many employees.
Through the chair, this is Jaime.
Mr. Jaime.
Ms. Wilson, it does almost seem like a mandate, because if a business only has, let's say, 5 employees and one of those is actively breastfeeding, they have the right, according to this language, I believe, to say, yes, I want to breastfeed my kid, find me an area. So it does become a mandate if you have a woman that is actively breastfeeding, does it not? And if she requests a place in that business.
Ms. Wilson. Did we lose you, Ms. Wilson?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Jaime. I do think the regs do 2 things. Under Section B, it says a licensee may designate an area. It doesn't require them to do so. But you're correct, under Section A, it does say a licensee or employee may bring a child on for the purpose. So I'd appreciate board comment about that, whether I guess this would then permit an employee to say, hey, I need to bring my child here to breastfeed. Is that going to be a problem for licensees? I guess is what I have for you. It doesn't mandate that they create a space, but it does require, upon request, that they be permitted to breastfeed.
And then just continuing, if they are permitted to bring a child on licensed premise, then they are required to have a designated room.
No, it says a licensee may designate. It doesn't say they have to.
Okay, I guess I misread the director's comments at the beginning. Director Klinkert, can you expound on that?
The exception being if it's a 50 or more employee organization. But go ahead, Mr. Director.
Yeah, no, that's basically what I was going to say, is that the federal law puts this line at 50, and my research showed there may be one or two licensees that seasonally may have more than 50. So if you don't have 50, federal labor law says you are not mandated to have this room. So what we were trying to do with this was, for those that want to volunteer to do that, this would allow them, essentially the board is saying, okay, if you choose to do this for your staff, for your female staff, then we're saying that if you choose to have a designated area within licensed premises, we're not going to be directly in conflict with federal labor law. That's the intent. And if there's some wording here that we've missed, and I'm glad we have these other eyes, now's the time to fix it. Over.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Jaime or Mr. DeShuck?
Yeah, so what Mr. Jaime was saying, so a licensee may designate, that's going to say that, if the wording was a licensee shall designate, that would change things. But I don't know from a statute perspective whether or not in Section 8, a licensee or employee of a licensee may request, or something to that effect, because I could see under A, an employee saying, listen, I can do this according to the statute. And even though I think that there's a contradiction between A and B on the requirement to make available a space. That's my concern.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Wilson, hang on for a second. There's
Okay.
somebody who has their phone not muted, and sounds like you're moving around and moving furniture. Would you please mute your phones? Thank you. Ms. Wilson.
If it is the intent of the board, it could provide a rewrite that says a licensee may permit a licensee or employee of a licensee to bring a child up to the age of 12 months, up to 12 months of age, onto a licensed premises for the purpose of breastfeeding. So I just have to make a distinction that it's still the licensee who would permit it, and that it's not the employee right.
But then doesn't that go against the DHSS, what their findings were, or their recommendations?
Well, I don't think so. DHSS, Director Klinkert had more of the discussion with them, so why don't I have him answer that question versus me opine.
Thank you. Through the chair. I was learning a lot about federal labor law. The state statutes doesn't cover this, but basically they draw a line under 50. You're not required, and the employer has the ability to say no by being able to say, well, it's an undue issue. It's a burden. It costs too much time or money. So it's really up to the employer. So we want to be careful not to mandate anything either way. This was kind of a say that if they choose to, you're not going to get in trouble for bringing a child on this. So that was kind of, we were trying to walk that line between federal law and giving the licensees the ability to meet it if they want to. But if you have over 50, apparently it says you have to provide it. So this is more of a volunteer for most licensees.
And Mr. Chair.
I just remember back in our two meetings ago, DHS sent a pretty strongly worded letter or memorandum stating, the health effects of children being on licensed premises unless it's a secluded area. And they were pretty adamant, if I recall correctly, that they did not support an infant being on a licensed premise at all at the time. But, if they have a room they can go to that's sterile, I'd be all in support of that. It's for safety of the children. It's a public health issue, in my opinion.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Wilson.
Part of the problem in getting full comments from DHSS is that they were pretty busy with the COVID emergency, and really our only alternative is because there's been such a significant rewrite is to put this back out to public comment. So hopefully if DHSS has more specific concerns, they can more directly engage the AMCO office. And another thing I just wanted to point out is that and Ms. Wellstein and I think others could testify that the industry or maybe of the perspective that they want the employees to have the right to request this accommodation even for facilities less than 50 people. And that might be a matter of public comment as well as to whether you want to make it a licensee's determination or an employee right.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Jaime.
Like I said, I just want to say one more time, I'm in full support of breastfeeding. I think it's important for the child's development and everything else. It's just, I do believe this needs to be, put to DHS and let them respond one more time prior to us adopting or even thinking about adopting this regulation. I think we need more input from them. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, so our options are to put out for public comment, amend and put out for public comment, send back to staff for revisions, or close the project. I think Mr. Jaime's suggestion that we ask DHSS to review this before we put out for public comment may also be an option that we could consider. Although that may or may not be the given it's another state agency, it may be okay. Ms. Wilson, would that be an option for us?
It would be. However, many state agencies respond within the public comment period, and I think I could work with the director to make sure that we actually get a response from the division within 30 days. So I think you can combine the public comment period. If I end up hearing that, or you could put it out for a longer period of time, yes.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And then we would really make sure to get their concerns about safety of the infants. I think the hope is with them not going into restricted areas, that's going to satisfy DHSS concerns, and also not going into on-site consumption areas, but we do want to verify that.
Okay.
And that works for me.
I agree.
So I do want this to move along.
Mr. Jaime. I think, DHSS has a public health aspect, but federal labor laws are different from DHSS. So we hopefully will get some response also from the State Department of Labor about this meeting the mandates of the labor standards. So is there a motion to put this out for public comment or any other motion from the board?
This is Jaime. I'll make a motion to put this back out for public comment and to ensure that the AMCO office, is in contact with DHSS.
Okay. You want to put this out for a 60-day comment period?
Sure.
Okay. So the motion is to put out for public comment for 60-day period. And is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Then moved and seconded. And also inherent in that is to assure that the DHSS comments during the public comment period. Is there any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, so on the motion to put the regulations, Ms. Sawyer.
This is Jane. I'm sorry, I probably missed it. Are we sending out those for public comment as is, or with Ms. Wilson's suggestions?
Actually, I would say it was not my suggestion. I think it would be important for people commenting, specifically licensees, to address whether they're concerned about employees having the right to bring their child on site, or whether it should be a licensee determination. So I think the amendment can happen later if the public comment shows a lot of concern about that, or the board has ongoing concern about that.
Understood. Thank you.
But I leave that to the board. That's really their decision.
Well, the motion is to put it out, public comment. There hasn't been any motion on the amendment, so we will leave it at that. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so on the motion to put the regulation out for public comment for a 60-day period, Mr. Jaime.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. DeShock.
Yes.
Mr. Schulte.
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so that takes care of tab 51. Okay, so we are on to tab 52. I don't know why I don't seem to have that tab in mind, but so it's regulations, projects, other sales limits under 3A6, 306, 355. This is tab 52, and I will try to find why I don't have that tab in here. But either Ms. Sawyer or Ms. Wilson.
It came as an email.
This will come back to me. Oh, I'm sorry.
It came as an email, Mr. Miller?
Yes, I apologize. I got it in an email, I think, Friday.
And this is back.
Ms. Wilson.
This is back for a very limited purpose, Mr. Chair. At the board's last meeting, the board adopted these regulations. Upon review by the Law and Regulations section, they wanted me to make sure that there was a clarification of intent. And we had a couple choices here. We could have either rewritten the minutes or brought this back to the board, but they want to ensure that you're aware that this is a substantive change in the amount of THC that can be sold, in that you are, I want to get their language specifically, so give me a moment. Sorry, my email is blocking up.
Okay.
In essence, they want to make sure that you're aware that this would allow more than 5,600 milligrams in 1 ounce or less of a sale, but not more than 56 milligrams if the marijuana is combined with something else. And I believe that was what you said the last time, but the minutes did not reflect it. So the request is that the board discuss that again. It doesn't have to revote the matter, but that there simply be a clarification that the board understands this is a substantive change, and that was their intent when they adopted them back at the last meeting.
Okay, is there board comments or questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
I believe this is what we discussed. I mean, I'm good with this.
Okay. Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I do understand. So the 5,600 milligrams of THC would be a limit on combined sales of marijuana products, but if there were, because that was originally based on an assumed potency of 20% THC. So if I understand correctly, this is leaving open the possibility that someone could buy an ounce, still buy up to an ounce of marijuana with a potency of 25%, and they would not be restricted from doing that. Am I correct in my understanding?
If you use the term 5,600 milligrams, which I believe is what you're saying. So, yes. And I do believe the board had a full discussion on this last point, that if someone is solely buying an ounce or lesser marijuana, it may be permissible that marijuana has more than 5,600 milligrams of THC. Does that say the same thing as you, Mr. Schulte?
I believe so. Yeah, I just want to make sure we're not rewriting the statute and regulations.
Yeah. Well, you are. This is a change.
Well, we're rewriting the regulations, yes, but we're not changing the statute, because the statute says that folks can possess up to an ounce of marijuana. And so the original limits here were predicated on that. The 5,600 milligrams was an approximation based on an assumed potency that turns out was low. But I think I understand. So I'm sorry, not to beat a dead horse, but if somebody walks into a store with this change in place, if somebody walks into a store and says, "Hey, I'd like an ounce of that product there," and that product happens to test out at, let's just say 30% THC, which would be half again the 5,600, so somewhere over 7,000 milligrams, that would still be permissible under our regulations because it's just an ounce of usable marijuana.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. If I understand right, this is regulations that we adopted and we've been asked for clarification. Does this discussion we just had, Ms. Wilson, satisfy the request?
So long as Ms. Craig and I will work in making sure the minutes are clear, and then if there is any dissenting view, this is the time to express it.
Okay. Are there any dissenting views from the board members? Okay, hearing none, we will leave it to staff to satisfy their request from, I guess, regulations part of Department of Law. And I did get the email. It's very strange. Sometimes on my iPad where I keep all of this stuff, when tabs don't come in on a Zendu, sometimes they show up as tabs, as PDF files, and others they actually open. And once they open on my iPad, I cannot save that tab. So I do have it. I thank Mr. Miller for forwarding that to me again. But I did have it. But once it opens up in the email, then it doesn't save as a tab to my PDF folder that I have all the other information in. So, but I did have it here. So thank you, Mr. Miller. So we are on to, and I have to now go back through my filing system here. And we are on to tab 53, which is TAC 345, and this is related to quality control and exit packaging. And all I have is a regulation. I don't have any narrative. So Ms. Sawyer or Mr. Klinkart?
Actually, Ms. Wilson on this.
Oh, Ms. Wilson, okay.
This is simply a rekey of a project that you already approved. However, it will require another vote. At the last meeting, you voted to basically change the requirements on opaqueness and how opaqueness of a product would be achieved. The law and regulations section looked at the language and thought that it could be clearer for the public at large, even though I think everyone in the meeting understood what was intended. So this rekey is brought back to you to ensure it continues to reflect your intent. It does not require going back out to public comment, but it does require a new vote on adoption.
Okay, is there any questions of board members of Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Schulte.
Mr. Schulte.
So this, I guess my perspective on this goes back to, what, November 22nd, 2015, when we first adopted the regulations, because this was a huge point of discussion. And the gist of that discussion was whether we were going to require every product as sold to be in an opaque child-proof or child-resistant package, or if the products merely had to be packaged in an opaque manner, child-resistant, as they left the store. The exit packaging approach. That was a huge point of discussion, and I think that has been reflected in the regulations all along. Now, I understand that some stores today choose to package their individual products in child-resistant packaging, but that's not what the regulations say. This edit would codify a pretty significant change in the regulations. It would do away with the whole opaque exit packaging approach and require everything in the store to be packaged child-resistant and opaque. I think, unless I'm misunderstanding this, and if I am understanding it correctly, I have a real problem with it.
Ms. Wilson, these regulations have already been adopted, right? And the regulations section wanted a revote. Is there any change to what we adopted before?
They believe no, but I want to make sure that that's accurate based upon Mr. Schulte's comment. So the intent here, but let me take a step back, that this regulation packet also includes the changes on providing samples to employees. None of that has been changed to my knowledge. But where we need to be looking is and I wish I had Sam on the phone to make sure I've clarified that. I'm just making sure.
So 306, 345, so 345A3 says marijuana or marijuana products sold as packaged in resealable and child-resistant packaging. The packaging must be designed or constructed to be significantly difficult for children under 5 years of age to open, but not normally difficult for adults to use properly. And then 345A4, when a purchaser leaves the retail section of a licensed premise, marijuana or marijuana products sold in an opaque packaging may be provided by the retail store or the purchaser. I assume that means if it goes in a backpack. So right. Are those the two sections? And these have already been adopted as written. And law simply wants us to affirm that that is what we meant.
Yes, and with that in mind, I don't believe it's changing anything regarding child-resistant packaging as whatever was the requirement before. But Mr. Schulte?
Mr. Schulte?
Yeah. So let me ask a question then. So I'm looking at the document in front of us, the first page of tab 53. And there's some edits there. The word "and" is bold and underlined in 2 locations, and then the following phrase is in braces to be removed. When the purchaser leaves the retail section of the licensed premises. That language being removed completely changes this section. It removes the exit packaging model and puts it into puts all these retailers into the position of having to package child-resistant and opaque every single product on their shelves. That was never my intent. And so was this edit added after is this the clarification that's being sought, or was this edit something that the board approved?
You don't want to change anything the board did. Only make the language clear, so I apologize.
So basically, I think what's before us, what's on the first pages, with all of that is the language that we had adopted. And law has not changed anything. They just asked for a revote or clarification. Is that correct, Ms. Wilson?
No, this is a rewrite in order to accomplish your intent. So I want to make sure it's accomplishing your intent.
Okay.
And as Mr. Schulte said, has law and regulations changed anything by deleting when the purchaser leaves the retail section of the licensed premises? In doing so, has it impacted child-resisting packaging in addition to the opaque requirement?
Okay.
So I guess my question is, the sentence that's embraced is to be removed. Am I correct in understanding that law is suggesting that sentence be removed? So that's not something the board had previously acted on, but that's what law is suggesting we do now. Am I correct there?
Here's law's concern. They wanted to make your intent at the last meeting clear, which is that opaqueness can be determined by, opaque packaging can be brought by either the retail marijuana store or the purchaser. If we have gone beyond your intent in now impacting child-resistant packaging, that is not law's intent. What we have to do is in turn clarify the language, and maybe if we could talk about this a little bit more. I can call the drafting and attorney and make sure we're not going beyond your initial adoption.
Ms. Wilson, could I ask Mr. Jaime?
Yeah, I understand where Mr. Schulte's coming from. I recall voting on this, and the whole vote, I believe, revolved around a person can put their product in a backpack or another bag that they brought on site. I thought that's all we really voted on, and we agreed on that.
I agree, sir.
Right.
It is 10:35. We've been at this for an hour and a half. I guess I would like maybe if Ms. Wilson can send us a link to what document we actually voted on at whatever meeting we adopted, so we could sort of compare what's here, because I agree with Mr. Schulte. When I look at the regulations book that I have, which is now probably pretty old, and I'm not exactly sure what the interim changes were, because this looks very similar to what is already in 3 AAC 3453 that says it was updated on 8/21/2019, and that's the last printed version of that regulation. So if you could give us a link or tell us where to go to look at what we actually voted on so we could compare. And so it's 10:36. Why don't we come back at 10:45? Let's take a 10-minute break, and maybe Ms. Wilson can help us out here a little bit.
Mr. Chair, this is Jane. I can send you that packet to all of you.
That would be good. Just send it as a link, and then we can open it up and maybe compare the two. So,
what do you need a link? Do you want a PDF document?
Whatever's easiest for you.
Yeah, that's fine. I have it right here. I'll send it.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So
and Mr. Chair, could you give me 15 minutes? I'm sorry, I need to try to reach out to law and regs instead of 10.
Okay, so 10:37, 15 minutes. So let's reconvene at 10:55. So at 10:55, we will come back. Thank you.
And this is Joan Wilson.
Hey, Jonah, this is Jaime. I'm back to you.
And then
Are we waiting on the chair?
I am here. I'm just waiting to be 10:55.
I see.
Yeah.
Mr. Schulte's here and Ms. Wilson's here. Mr. Deshak, are you online?
I am here.
Mr. Jaime?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Mr. Miller? Mr. Miller? Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Klinkard, Ms. Craig, you're all here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we are back. We were discussing on tab 53. The initial section was 345A3 and 345A, and after Ms. Sawyer sent me what we actually voted on before, we also have a section of 460 D7 that also law made some significant changes. So did all of you receive the information from Ms. Sawyer on what we had actually approved at our last, whatever meeting that was? Did everybody receive that?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Wilson, were you able to get the other attorney online, or are we just us?
I was. I spoke to her. I could make someone available if these answers still raise concerns. So let me start with A3 and A4. With the rewrite, the law and regulations section are trying to distinguish between point of sale and leaving a store. So what the change would do is say a marijuana or marijuana product at the point of sale must be packaged in resealable or child-resistant packaging. And there's no intent on who has to achieve that, who has to provide the resealable or the child-resistant packaging, whether it's the manufacturer or the retailer. Whatever the past practices can continue to be the current practices. What it does say is that after the point of sale, opaqueness can be achieved before by either the retailer or the purchaser before the purchaser leaves the retail section of the store. So it was trying to make a distinction between 2 points in time, not between any obligation as to who has to achieve the child-resistant packaging. Does that accomplish your intent?
Through the chair, is Jaime.
Mr. Jaime.
Yes, after reviewing the language that we proposed and language that was sent to us during TAP 53, I agree that at least in my opinion, our intent is expressed, and I'm good with this. Thank you.
Mr. Schulte.
Well, I still have some misgivings about it, but I also feel like I'm responsible for this nightmare because I think I drafted the original language, and in fact, I'm sure I did. I went back, I looked at the amendment that I presented back in 2015, and yeah, it could have been better written. I think that this is going to be a huge topic for our labeling and packaging subcommittee because I think it could be made better. But I think I understand. What I'm trying to avoid is a requirement that every single product on the shelves for display, ready to be purchased, has to be packaged in these fairly expensive packages that inevitably then just get thrown away and end up in a landfill. That was kind of the intent, and to allow instead for an exit packaging model. And if we're saying here that it's our intent that the retail products on the shelves do not necessarily have to be packaged that way, but they have to be opaque and child resistant before they leave the store, then I'm okay with it. Unfortunately, I don't think that the regs clearly say that.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Wilson.
What we do have here is a robust discussion of what the intent of the board is, and also I think enforcement is the one who will have a thorough understanding of what this means as well, so as not to issue NOVs.
So now I think
nothing is going to change a manufacturer's obligation. The packaging can be achieved. More than one product can be in one final package. And I did ask that very specific question of law and regulations, and they said yes, because this section primarily addresses the retailer, there's no prior obligation of the manufacturer or others to separately package each product in this manner.
Mr. Miller.
so. Now I understand Bruce's concern. So I'll try to explain it from the retailer's perspective to get it on the record. I have products on my shelf right now that are not in child-resistant packaging. And I sell it to the customer not in child-resistant packaging. But when that customer leaves the store, I put it in a larger bag that is with multiple other products. But I'm still selling that product, and I'm still selling it, I guess, in a child-resistant package if I put it in there, right?
Ms. Wilson.
Are you simultaneously selling and putting it in the package? I think the answer is yes, because what they're doing is distinguishing between point of sale and leaving the store. I would assume you're putting it in a package and then selling it simultaneously. Is that accurate?
It's accurate enough. I mean, it's at the register. They're checking the customer out. The customer pays for it. We put it in the child-resistant opaque packaging, seal it, and give it to them.
And then in that case, it may also be, and therefore you've established the opaque.
Ms. Wilson, we lost you.
Be clear, and so long as the purchaser puts it in an opaque bag, it's a proof of service.
I'm sorry, I
Ms.
couldn't hear that. Could
you
anyone
were
else?
breaking up. Ms. Wilson, you were breaking up. We were in and out of your mic.
Yeah, my AirPods Pros just died, so I'm now on speaker. So
okay.
I'll restate that. The retailer can sell the product at the end stage, more than one product, in a package that is resealable and tamper-proof. If it's clear, they give that product to the purchaser who has to put that entire purchase in an opaque bag. The retailer also has the choice of providing an opaque package initially. So my question was, is that clear to Mr. Miller and other board members?
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, it's clear to me. I just wanted it on the record.
Okay.
And we're using the word clear to describe opaque, which is kind of funny.
Yes, that's true. Ms. Wilson, given that 3AC 306-345A was not part of the regulation that we adopted, and I assume this is because they are adding a new paragraph. Could you tell us what our motion needs to be in order to, I guess, accept these changes or do a revote?
I would make it as simple as a vote to adopt the regulations as proposed in tab, what are we talking about, tab 52 or 53? And I think that motion would be clear enough for the record, sir.
Okay. All right.
Now,
any
are
other
you
questions from Ms. Wilson?
Are you concerned about any further changes regarding opaqueness with samples provided to employees? You mentioned that, and the intent was not to change.
I mean, when we passed 306-460-D7, which is on the front page of what Ms. Sawyer sent us, we used the same language for the purposes of this subsection, the opaqueness package.
Mm-hmm.
That was, again, rewritten by law and just says that samples provided under this section, and then take some stuff out. So basically, 40697 D7 was rewritten, and then it looks like 406 or 460 D is amended by adding a new paragraph. I just wanted to make sure the board was aware that you know, there's a lot more changes in here than just what was in the first, you know, 2 paragraphs, because we had used the same language in a couple of places and law was making a couple of other changes. So I know we've dealt with page 1, but we really hadn't dealt with some of the others. I wanted to make sure that the board was aware of that. It looks like it's all doing the same thing, but if there was any questions from any board members, we needed to deal with that.
And I agree with that, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Jaime.
No, I just want to say, you know, the language in tab 53 that's proposed and the language that we added, I mean, I think they're almost similar. They're just worded slightly different, but I don't think it affects our intent. So I'd like to propose a motion to adopt the language in tab 53.
Okay, there's been a motion to adopt the language in tab 53 at the August 19, 20 meeting. Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Okay, I would just ask before we vote that it would be much more helpful for us if there was some narrative explanation of why we're asked to reconsider and what the changes might be in some drafts, so we know what we approve. Because in my mind, this is a pretty significant rewrite. And I understand they use less words than we did, and maybe it's appropriate, but just being given what's in tab 53 versus what we had already approved with no other than oral explanation has been difficult for me anyway.
We will do that, sir.
With that, we have a motion to approve the language as presented in tab 53. At our August 19 and 20 meeting. Is there any further discussion before we vote?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, I don't want to relitigate this entire discussion, but and I appreciate the work of law to help us clarify this, but I don't think it's actually clarified anything, and I'm really concerned at some unintended consequences that could come out of this. So I'm going to vote against it until a working group has an opportunity to go through this entire section and bring some greater clarity to it. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, so on the motion to adopt the language in tab 53, Mr. DeShock.
Yes.
Mr. Jaime.
Yes.
Mr. Schulte.
No.
Mr. Miller.
No.
Whoa. I guess
That's
I
why you
will
get the
go
big
with a
bucks.
no. I know. I will vote no. And so that motion fails on a 2-3 vote. Ms. Wilson, before I assume anything, would you tell me what happens now?
So you voted down the changes. Law and regulations may determine that the prior, I'm emailing them right now, adoption, that the regulations can't be final because the regulations as adopted were ambiguous.
Okay, and therefore it will be referred back to us and come to us at the October meeting?
Yeah. Let me just, though, let them know right now that they voted down the change and see if they'll withdraw their objections.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schulte.
I know we had a discussion earlier about the working group, the first working group. Perhaps this would be a good reason to get the packaging and labeling working group spooled up, perhaps sooner.
We have about 3 priorities for the next working group already.
All right.
And no, I totally understand it, and I want to try to deal with this tab. And then I think we need to talk about the next working group. That was something that the director had mentioned early on, and we had moved that to the end of the meeting, and so we're about there.
Okay.
So with that, waiting for whatever Ms. Wilson can tell us, basically, we are at tab 54, which I'd like to move to a little bit later. We are on tab 55, which is a marijuana handler's card, and I would like to recommend that we table that to the next meeting. I believe that was something that came out pretty late for us.
Through the chair.
Mr. Miller.
I totally agree. I did not get an opportunity to review this thoroughly since it came into us so late.
So is that a motion to table? I can't make a motion.
Yes, it is a motion to table.
Okay, there's been a motion to table till October 2nd, or the October meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any objection to tabling that to October? Okay, hearing no objection, we will pick up that one at the next meeting. Tab 56. Which is Alaska Cannabis Outfitters requesting an additional 2-week extension. Mr. Klinkhart.
Sir, this is reference Alaskan Cannabis Outfitters, Great White Bear, doing business as Alaskan Cannabis Outfitters, a retail marijuana store in Kenai Peninsula, submitted a request to reopen the store in accordance with 3 AAC 306-920A. Following the death of William Bear, a sole member of this LLC, permission to operate the business was granted to the personal representative on April 14th and is subject to 3 AC 306-920B, which states, and I won't read the whole thing, excuse me, on July 13th, 2020, 90 days after the director's approval was obtained, a request for a 2-week extension to file the transfer application documents was submitted to AMCO. The necessary documents were received on July 20th. Attached is the paperwork for Donna Morgan, William Bear's personal representative, as well as the written request for an extension. I now turn it over to the board for your consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Klinkhart, so what we're basically being asked to approve the license transfer, or are we just simply giving some extension? I'm not exactly sure what we're being asked to do.
It's my understanding that they are only asking for an extension of this, and I actually asked if they needed more time, but they assured me that they just needed a 2-week extension. Let me pull up the other file here to make sure.
Ms. Wilsine, are you online?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Wonderful. Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay. I see that you're one of the emails in here. Can you tell us what you're actually requesting, what the status is, and what we might be asked to do?
Yes, we only needed a request to give us 2 extra weeks on the 90-day time frame, which has already passed, and the director gave us, temporary approval pending your approval, to get all of the application docs in for the transfer. All of the application docs are in for the transfer now, because we had that 2-week extension, and it's in the queue for AMCO, so you do not have the actual transfer in front of you. It has not yet been reviewed by AMCO reviewers, but we needed that extra 2 weeks to be able to get all the documents together, and get, Donna's signature. She's out of state, in for the transfer, and so that's what the director gave us an extension on pending your approval.
Okay. So is there a motion from the board?
Motion to approve the 2-week extension for Alaska Cannabis Outfitters, license 10057.
Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, it's been moved in second. Is there any discussion from the board?
This is Jaime. The only thing is I want to make sure the AMCO office thoroughly investigates her residency. It says he's currently living out of state. So that's it.
Right. The personal representative who's appointed by the court through the chair, this is Janet Wilsine, lives out of state, but the son, Ian Bear, he's the one that the license is actually being transferred to. And he lives here. It's not going to stay with the personal representative. She's just the one in charge of directing where the assets go per his will.
Any other questions, Mr. Jaime?
No, sir.
Okay, so on the motion to approve the 2-week extension, Mr. DeShock.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Schulte.
Yes.
Mr. Jaime.
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so I assume we'll see the transfer hopefully in October. Okay, thank you. Then tab 57, it says here staff is requesting clarification of the board's delegation at the June 10/11/2020 meeting. Mr. Klinkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is reference to Forget Me Not Enterprises, doing business at Southeast Essentials, a marijuana product facility, and a board consideration that happened on June 10th through 11th at that meeting. The standard production procedure and detailed manufacturing process was for 3 products, one called Dip Joint, Dipped and Roll Joint, and Solventless Alaskan Caviar. Included the language, quote, a random sample of each production lot of finished product will be sent to the testing lab prior to labeling and packaging for sale to a licensed retailer, unquote, which was required to be removed as part of delegation. During consideration of products, the board stated that products composed of multiple concentrates may not be equally dispersed, so the board has required that the labels show the test results for each separate concentrate, but not the overall testing results. However, testing of the finished product is required under 3 AAC 306550. Licensing staff requests a verification that this delegation is required. Attached are the MJ16 forms that were brought to the board in June. Licensing staff also requests clarification on how similar products composed of 2 or more approved concentrates are to be labeled. Do the test results of each concentrate need to be on the label for each individual product, or are they to be included on the labels of shipping containers? The staff and I are available for additional further questions if need be. Thank you.
Okay, comments or questions from the board? Okay, I will start. This is probably caused by myself. I believe in the past, what we had determined was that if you take and you roll, pre-roll, and then you inject concentrate into that product, and then you roll it, let's complicate it, making basically 3 products, and you roll it in keef, and that it would be difficult to test, I guess, at the end product to determine how you would label it. And I thought we had decided that if the keef was tested, the concentrate that was put in there was tested, and if the bud and flower had been tested, those 3 tests would be on the label, because you really couldn't test that final product. And I thought that was what the delegation was, because this particular applicant said that they would put it all together and then send a sample out for test. Well, if they put together 1,000 pre-rolls that have been, hand-added concentrate liquid into it, I'm not sure what kind of results they would get. And so that's what I thought we were accomplishing. Apparently I wasn't clear enough with the board or the staff that they would need to show the testing of each of the products that were combined in this particular pre-roll that had 2 other concentrates added to it. But I'm open to board discussion whether I was wrong or not, but I thought that was the discussion we had, and the board had agreed that that's what we had talked about. Maybe Mr. Miller remembers, because I think he and I were the 2 that discussed this most of the time.
Well, through the chair behind me, I think this discussion was on the last board meeting, and my understanding is what you just said. So thank you.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
I in this discussion, I felt like we've had it for the last couple of years, and I felt that this was the most accurate way to give the results. I guess I'm open to further discussion, but I felt this was the most accurate way, and I thought that going forward, we expected to see, these infused joints and dip joints to have these results on the label.
And the results being the results of the testing of each of the 3 products or 2 products or whatever was combined.
Correct.
Okay. That's what I was thinking as well. Is there any other comments from the board? Comments from staff? Did we clarify for you, or do you still have questions?
Director Klinkart, through the chair. I just want to, thank you for asking that, because is there anybody from our marijuana examiner staff? Because it was the staff that brought this forward. Are you guys clear? I want to make sure our notes that we have this, so you guys are ready to go. Any of the staff have comments or questions?
This is Carrie. I am getting a message right now. If we could.
Okay. All right.
Just one moment.
All right.
Okay.
And just to make sure my notes are... No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and I think I understand the concern is the regulations say the final product must be tested. And, we are combining products here, so I can understand where staff is struggling a bit.
But one of the great things is that they're rule followers. I will give them that, and they keep me on the straight and narrow. So when they bring something like this, they'll be much more comfortable once they know that they've got the good guidance. So I appreciate the conversation.
As a side note, while we're waiting, unfortunately, they bring back a lot of stuff to us that was done wrong.
And that's good.
We're all in the same boat.
I don't want staff to think that, when we say, well, you should have understood, that we're in any way degrading their work, because they do terrific work, and they have worked really hard over the last 3 or 4 years. The applications are much more consistent. They're much, much better. They have really taken what we have talked about and operationalized it, and it's made this process. I mean, we went through 40-some applications yesterday, and 2 years ago we'd have still been on half of those on the second day. So a 3-day meeting. So it's really improved, and I appreciate them asking for clarification because I do appreciate them trying to be as consistent to the applicants and the licensees as they can be. So, Ms. Craig, do you get anything back?
TJ is currently reviewing his documents that he had put together, and he will either jump on or he will let me know. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. No, that's fine. Okay. So let's wait. We'll just sort of hold that open and see if there's anything that comes back. So before we get to the mailbox or board comments, I wanted to talk a little bit about the next meeting. I'm thinking that will again be a distance meeting. I believe Mr. Klinkard and staff are working on one of the versions of the various Zoom products out there, so that hopefully that meeting will take place via Zoom. So we will be able to see each other and visually while we are reviewing the documents and doing our work. As it works, the city, for the last 3 months, all of our assembly and committee meetings, a lot of our planning commission meetings have all been done via Zoom. It is easy to have a participant list and a attendee list so that the industry could be in the attendee list. And as we get to a license, those attendees can then be moved to the participant list and then move back once they're done with the testifying. And at least the Zoom, the host has the ability to mute all of the attendees while the participants can keep their own muted until they're talking. It really does work fairly well. Mr. Klinkard has said that he has a couple of staff members that have volunteered to try to be the Zoom gurus for the office, and they will be testing it out over the next couple of months with staff meetings and meetings with industry and other groups. So I think we should plan on the October 28-29 meeting to be distance and hopefully to be Zoomed. Is there any questions from the board or any further comments from Mr. Klinkard? I know I stepped all over some people's comments, but I thought I'd just at least bring that out of what my conversation with Mr. Klinkard has been.
Through the chair, Director Klinkard.
Mr. Klinkard.
You took the words out of my mouth. The only thing that I would add is I think what I'd like to do is have you, actually each of the chairmen from each of the boards, meet with our Zoom staffer moderators beforehand, so you can kind of each decide how you want to flow things, and I think that'll be helpful so that they're there to help you, and so you don't necessarily have to be clicking on things or doing stuff, but we'll have you meet with them so that you have some idea and some comfort as to how you want it to go. So that's all I had to add.
Okay, that'll be very useful. Any comments from the board?
Through the chair, I have a question.
Mr. Miller.
So, this is Alaska. Sometimes we're in not some of the best internet places in the world. I just wanted to make sure there was an alternative dial-in number for this meeting for a board member should they be in a bad internet area.
That's a good point. I believe that there is a dial-in option. I know here in Juneau, if people need to be on the phone, they're on the phone. There's a different way to be recognized and be brought over. But I will make sure that Mr. Klinkard has that option. And hopefully the board members, and I think that would be much more subject to some of the licensees. I would hope that the board members would hopefully be someplace on those 2 particular days to have a little bit better internet. Don't want anybody out there.
This is Carrie, if you're ready.
Ms. Craig.
Yes, thank you. So I heard back from TJ. He says that your direction seems very clear. It seems like there might just be some discussion that needs to happen in office between licensing and enforcement. So we will take care of that, and we thank you very much for your clarifications.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll do the next meeting via Zoom, hopefully, and we'll try to get all the bugs worked out before we get in to that meeting. The next item I'd like to discuss and try to go back to an earlier tab. Tab 3, which is a status of working groups, and we had talked about what might be the next working group. I know we need to finish up the one that started on the transportation, and then we had talked about the education courses for the handler card. We had talked about the packaging that Mr. Schulte had mentioned. There was one other working group that I thought we had some discussion about when we were...
Mr. Chair, Director Klinkart.
Mr. Klinkart.
Yeah, I have also part of enforcement, the fine schedule that Member Jaime mentioned.
Okay. All right. You're right. That was, let's see, I got to go back to my top of my page here.
Yeah, I'm looking at my other notes too here.
Yeah, so I think there's the education handlers courses, there's the packaging related to the regulations that we didn't adopt the changes to from law. And there's the fee fine schedule. There may be a couple others. Those are 3. And Mr. Klinkart, you had given us a whole list at the last meeting of other items. I know testing was on that list that you provided at the previous meeting where we talked about and set up the first working group. So I will stop talking. Is there any other board member that has any other ideas for working groups that we should consider? Okay, so we have education, packaging, fee, fine schedule, and testing. Is there any discussion from the board as to how to prioritize those for looking at how to involve staff and to not overburden staff?
I apologize. I'm looking at some paperwork here. I'm sure I'm going to have comment in a minute. I'm trying to get back to a particular tab.
Okay, that's fine.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, a question I would have is maybe we could get some feedback on how the first working group went and how much of an imposition that was.
Tab 3 gives you a report, and it did lay out some of the pitfalls. But Mr. Klinkart, if you want to further elaborate to Mr. Schulte's question.
No, I think it's a really good question because, again, I struggle with the fact that this board needs working groups. You cannot be doing all of this work during your 2-3 day meetings, and you need the input. And yet, I struggle with the fact that there's only so many hours in the day. And so this is a good thing for me to test out. I feel that between the staff, we can. Not to mention, we also have this other board that you don't like to talk about, but they take up some of our time too. So to be fair, but I definitely think that I think we can do one at a time if we have good clarity and we, like the word transportation, to be able to narrow it, say, in this one, we'll do this one next. And this one next. And as I get approval to get more staff, my goal was to have somebody whose full-time job would be to do this. So, but right now I'm really sensing that we could really do quality work with just one working group at a time. And if we could do more, I'll let you know. Hopefully, if I can hire one more person, I think we could easily be doing more than one at a time.
Okay. Mr. Schulte, any follow-up?
Who is this other board of which you speak?
Alcohol beverage.
Look at that and let you know.
There's some side conversation going on. A woman is asking about something. If you could mute your phone, please, so we can conduct our business. So, Mr. Schulte, do you have a follow-up comments or question?
Well, I guess it sounds like then we kind of need to wrap up the first one before we can embark on another. I mean, it's sort of the takeaway, I guess.
Yeah, but, you know, staff could do some planning, you know, thinking about what the next steps might be. I know probably Mr. Miller is going to be trying to wrap up that part of the transportation that they had done and move on. We would try to get a board member to be active in this and not more than one board member. So we basically have 4: education, package, fee, fine, testing. Is there any discussion about how staff might want to prioritize, or how the board would want to prioritize what working group should come first?
Just, Mr. Chairman?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Schulte.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, just I've already spoken. Nick, go ahead.
No, I was just curious. We talked about some open projects that obviously I think I would prioritize above those, but I wish I would have taken better notes. I think we came up with 4 or 5 project requests. Were any of those identified as to having to have a working group?
The fine schedule did. I don't know if raising the limits on edibles. I thought that was staff to bring back in October. There was the hemp and marijuana license combination, or whatever. That again was with the attorney and staff. There was yours related to the IDs and accepting of tribal IDs. And then there was the issue on limiting the licenses, all of which may come to fruition, but I think most of those, we need staff to do the background work initially and talk about those in October. Those were what was on my list of sort of the open projects or projects we opened.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I think we're here talking about working groups, and we've identified at least these 4. Testing is always one, and that may come up somewhat along the hemp and marijuana combination if we were to get any labs that wanted to be in-state testing for hemp products as well.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, just based on my perceived, my perception of the frequency with which these things would come up, I'm thinking that probably testing and then packaging would be the next 2. I'm just based on the number of times that the 2 subjects seem to come up.
Okay.
I guess packaging and labeling, really, since it's all one.
Right. Yeah, packaging and labeling. Any other comments from board members?
This is Jaime.
Ms. Triney.
Not to make more work, but maybe staff put it like a Survey Monkey or something, and then, you know, with the order that we want to put it in, and then whatever it comes out to, that's the order we'll do it. Versus sitting here trying to discuss what, you know, who thinks what's more important, and we can include staff
Great idea.
in that Survey Monkey.
Okay, Ms. Triney. I think the director and I can work on that, because I haven't gone back to the tab of one of our special meetings in which we did sort of laid out, you know, a whole arena of things, and we can probably work on some way to survey that with staff, enforcement, and the board. That may be a good solution and help us get a little bit more clarity on what we mean by each of these projects. Okay. So with that suggestion, Mr. Klinkard and I will work on that and hopefully bring back for a lot further discussion and some results of that at our October meeting. Okay, so I think we're down to marijuana mailbox. Is there anybody has any comments or questions related to the marijuana mailbox?
Mr. Chair, DeShock?
Mr. DeShock.
Yeah, the marijuana mailbox, just one thing, if anybody's listening that sent in the emails or if anybody's concerned about it, I'm worried about the number of complaints that we're receiving about a residential licensing establishments inside of a residential area. And to me, that's a really valid point, but as a board, and for anybody that's concerned about it, as a board, if the establishment is inside of a city boundary or a borough boundary, outside of the general regulations, about 500 feet from a school or a correctional facility, etc., that's something that we do with delegation, and the board isn't going to be the best place to remedy that particular item. Now, outside, if it were to happen outside of any boundary, then we would have that authority, but just want to make sure that everybody understands that it is a valid concern, but that is something that should be handled more locally than at the board, and that we're not ignoring that, but we are following the statute.
Okay, and that is much clearer in places like Fairbanks and Juneau and Anchorage and Matsu and Kenai. It's where there are zoning rules, sometimes much stricter than other places, and I know here in Juneau you cannot have any marijuana business in any zone that is strictly residential. So we got mixed use, commercial, industrial, but if it's residentially zoned, you can't have any. I know we've had lots of issues with Anchorage's zoning and the difference between Fairbanks, North Star Borough, and the city and North Pole and on. But yes, we do rely on the local rules for those. Any other comments on the marijuana mailbox or questions? Okay, hearing none. We are down to board member comments. So let's start with Mr. DeShock.
I don't have any further comments outside of addressed on the in the mailbox, and for everything else, I think everything else was covered throughout the meeting and captured in minutes.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
I guess, cover the comment you made earlier that, we got through 58 tabs in a day and a half. A year ago, that would have taken us 3 days, and, 95% of that credit goes to the staff, and I appreciate the hard work they do, and I appreciate talking to the other board members during these meetings, so thank you.
Okay, Mr. Schulte.
Well, as always, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate all the work of the director and staff and legal counsel, and hopefully we didn't lump too much more work on your respective plates. I did just want to ask, Mr. Chairman, if we had some discussion about offering some board guides on the MJ16s. Was it your intent not to take that up at this meeting, or?
I think I would like to take a look at that, and I will talk with you and or Ms. Wilson about whether that might be better in a regulation project or just an advisory. And then if it makes it any clearer, we can do some kind of a special meeting or really bring it up at the October meeting. I appreciate the work, but I guess I wasn't ready to sort of do the work on the fly. Would like some time to read it and think about it.
Okay. Yeah, I'd rather
Yes,
be done
I do
well
believe
than
I did
quickly.
say we were going to talk about it later, and I sort of skipped over that. So I
Okay.
apologize.
Okay, no worries. I don't sense that it's really going to hold anybody's plans up dramatically right now. Anyway, so yeah, I have nothing further to add.
Okay, Mr. Jaime.
I'd just like to echo everybody's sentiments. I'd like to thank the staff and the other board members. It's always enlightening, so thank you.
Okay. All right. My comments are pretty much the same. I appreciate the staff. I appreciate working through here. I haven't seen a meeting that has only 50-some tabs in quite a while. Usually we have 80 or 90. That may be COVID. It may be slowing down some of the application process for individuals. I appreciated the public comments that we had gotten. I think we have a work plan. I would point out that Mr. Klinkard and Mr. Brady from the ABC board and I did meet once to talk about staff issues, talk about budget processes. We are still working on how to sort of impact the state budget process. And I know that Cost of Management and Budget is working with various departments and divisions over the next couple of months to build a budget that will then work its way up to be made public December 15th or before by the governor. Don't know what the election results may change in any of that from the primary, but Mr. Klinkard and I are working on that. I would remind the board that we will also be probably holding a special meeting related to review of enforcement policies that were talked about earlier. We will try to schedule that. That will probably be a Zoom to test out. And I'm sure that we will ask for what's a good day and time to do that. So just remind you that we will probably have at least one meeting for us sometime between now and the October meeting dates. And again, I just thank staff, Ms. Wilson, for working on the fly here a little bit, and appreciate all the hard work of the board members, and I am really impressed that we were able to get through this in a day and a half. I don't think we made any large mistakes. I don't think we made any, but I'm sure that in a few months we'll probably find out that we had. With that, is there any other comments from Mr. Klinkard or Ms. Wilson?
No, sir. Thank you all.
Mr. Chair, two things. You asked the question regarding revenue and tax collection. I have not received an answer for that, but I will make sure that I'll work with the director to either have an in-person presentation from revenue or a report on how their, what their plan is for enforcement or collection.
Okay.
And I have not heard anything from law and regulations. Everyone's so busy, so I will give you a report as to what will be the final resolution of the regulations you already adopted regarding opaqueness. So I imagine you'll see that in your board packet as well. And yes, I think your point about getting a memo to support that, the changes, that was on me. I just was too busy, and I really should have had that for you. So you won't have that situation happen again, sir.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. And I know we're volunteers and you work for a living, so I understand that some of our demands just add to your workload. Okay, with that, then I will state that the Marijuana Control Board meeting of August 19th and 20th is adjourned at 11:50 a.m. On the 20th. And I appreciate all of the hard work and look forward to talking to all of you in the future. And have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, goodbye, all.
chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end.